Jah give I courage to fight the fight. Oh, say fight the fight. I know they might try to conquer I, Lord. Conquer I.
Thank you. Comrade Chairman, comrade officers, comrade members of the NEC, members of the media who are in attendance. In setting the context for this presentation to the NEC, I believe it is fair to say that despite successful efforts over successive governments to stabilize the public finances, Jamaica's economy continues to be marked by low growth and low productivity. Our society also continues to be plagued by very high levels of inequality and violent crime. When we look at the economy at this time, we see that the real estate market has been resilient during the pandemic, producing housing solutions well outside the affordability of most Jamaicans. In reality, this is another manifestation of the inequality in our society, suggesting that more well-off Jamaicans have been surviving the economic downturn relatively unscathed, and we give thanks for that. On the other hand, the majority of Jamaicans are reeling from a sliding dollar that has fallen to 155 to 1, and price hikes in the basic food items like rice, flour, and chicken back that are a stable nutrition for our people. The data show that people earning the minimum wage are now below the poverty line. The government's response to protecting the most vulnerable Jamaicans, especially the unemployed and the informally self-employed, was their so-called compassionate grant, a single payment of 10,000 Jamaican dollars, less than 100 US dollars, more than 1 year ago. Nothing has been done since. That single payment was made in the run-up to the 2020 general election. A cynic could describe it as an exercise in state-sponsored vote buying. Since then, the economic hardships facing the people have only worsened, but the government has done nothing more to help that category of vulnerable Jamaicans. The suffering of the people gets worse every day as prices continue to rise in the wake of spiraling oil prices and sea freight rates, compounded by the sliding of the Jamaican dollar. The PNP has called for the GCT removal on tablets and other devices for learning to ease the burden on parents who wish to provide each child with this essential learning tool. The government has failed to act. The PNP has called for regular periodic disbursements of the compassionate grant until the economy has recovered to pre-pandemic levels of GDP and employment. This call has fallen on deaf ears. We have repeatedly demanded that the oil price hedge tax that has not been used for that purpose since 2016 be rolled back to give transport operators and other motorists a break from the spiraling price of fuel at the pump. The government has ignored these calls. We have called for the billions of dollars in dormant accounts to be used to help small businesses to survive in a very hostile economic environment, and also to assist students who have been forced to unenroll or deregister because they cannot afford the cost of attending university. But the government has not answered that call either. Jamaica consistently ranks in the world among the worst when it comes to murders per 100,000 people. The crime situation today is out of control. Murders are up again this year over last year. Multiple murders and the killing of women and children have become commonplace in our society. The government has no strategy to bring these things under control. We note that the constituencies of the National Security Minister, the Attorney General, the Minister of Local Government, and the Minister of Education are all under Zozos. Only one token community under Zozo is not in a JLP constituency. This would seem to an objective onlooker to be a gross politicization of protection against violent crime. The zones of murderous barbarity in other places across Jamaica are left in a crisis of inadequate law enforcement and a condition of deep insecurity. Ordinary citizens are living in fear in hotspots across Jamaica, void of protection from their government. The education system is in deep crisis as the JLP government wasted its entire first term of office by abandoning the Tablets in Schools program and failed to pursue a national broadband internet connectivity strategy in the way that PNP had successfully pursued national electrification through the rural electrification program back in the 1970s. It took the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic for the government to belatedly enter on the reference of this critical area. It has been a case of far too little, far too late. The result is that we have a generation of students, the majority of whom have effectively lost a year and a half of schooling. The government is yet to present a strategy for addressing this crisis in the education system, which will have long-term negative effects on the lives of those students and indeed the society as a whole. The health sector is also in crisis. Jamaica's COVID vaccination performance is appallingly bad, worse than every other country in the Western Hemisphere other than our neighbor Haiti. And we know the crisis that they are confronting. The Prime Minister decided to open up while the rest of the world was already reeling from another wave of the pandemic due to the highly infectious Delta variant, which we can be sure will be on our shores soon. We warned him then that this was very risky, given the openness of our borders and the very low level of vaccine penetration achieved to date in our country. We are now seeing signs of another spike as positivity rates of COVID are trending up and the number of hospitalizations and critically ill patients are again rising. The government is once again backtracking on its earlier position. Doctors recently had to strike to end the practice of regularly renewed short-term contracts and to address several other employment grievances. The Cornwall Regional Hospital debacle continues, leaving Western Jamaica without a properly functioning Type A hospital for years now. There is no end in sight to the completion of that project. The beleaguered project demonstrates mismanagement of monumental proportions. The minister, however, remains in charge, and no one has been held to account. The crisis in governance continues. The first term of the Andrew Holness-led JLP government was the most corrupt political administration in the history of Jamaica. With scandal after scandal and billions of dollars of public funds not accounted for. 2 cabinet ministers forced to resign, one of them now before the criminal courts for corruption-related charges, and several public boards having to be shut down. We have heard that at the beginning of their second term, the cabinet went through anti-corruption training administered by the Integrity Commission, which is a very good idea. However, it seems that some of their members were asleep during the training. The Airports Authority of Jamaica made 2 massive, unlawful investments in a startup business in breach of the regulations governing investments by public sector bodies and in breach of the Airport Authority's own investment policy. The current chairman herself invested in the same startup business and was appointed to its board shortly thereafter. Now the Airports Authority is trying to sell the investment in the wake of this public scandal. The minister responsible for transport needs to step up in the face of this fiasco, affecting a large public body within his portfolio. Our spokesperson for finance, Julian Robinson MP, has called for the resignation of the Airports Authority Board in the face of this major violation of good public sector governance. I reiterate that call today. Scarce public resources cannot be misapplied like this with no one held accountable. The Airports Authority Board must go. Yeah. Comrades, this is the context in which Jamaica finds itself today. The situation is dire. The model of development being pursued by the JLP government is not addressing the critical issues facing our country. The people need the People's National Party to step up and answer the call. When we look back at our history, we in the PNP can find confidence and hope in a record of achievement and progress for the Jamaican people. The government of the Right Excellent Norman Washington Manley from 1955 to 1962 achieved the highest levels of economic growth in the world at that time. And indeed, the momentum of that phenomenal economic achievement carried through into the 60s and until the oil crisis struck in the early 70s. Norman Washington Manley opened up secondary education for Jamaicans through the introduction of the common entrance exam. Previously, only 2 free places per parish were available. He also began the process of rationalizing and expanding Jamaica's electricity system to become an island-wide electricity system. In the 1970s, the PNP under Michael Manley achieved a social revolution that marked the real transition from colonialism to independence, especially in terms of the status of the masses of our people. No bastard, no day again, with the passage of the Status of Children's Act. Everyone lawful. Equal pay for women, maternity leave with pay, the Industrial Disputes Tribunal, and a labor code to bring justice at the workplace. Massive housing programs for low-income persons who are living in abject poverty. Free education. All are legacies that Michael Manley left behind to uplift and empower the Jamaican people. In his second coming from 1989 to 1993, Michael Manley recognized the importance of entrepreneurship, markets, and free enterprise in achieving a strong economy to support social transformation and fundamentally transform the economic arrangements of our country by deregulating trade and liberalizing the foreign exchange system. At the same time, he introduced innovations like employee share ownership plans to incentivize the inclusion of workers in the ownership of the economy. P.J. Patterson took the baton in 1993 and proceeded to transform the infrastructure of the country. He designed a platform for a modern economy and a caring society, highways to construct major facilities and towns, major cities and towns, modern airports and seaports to support economic growth, dismantling the colonial era telecoms monopoly and creating a vibrant mobile sector, opening up the media landscape to multiple radio stations and local cable channels, creating the National Health Fund and the Drugs for the Elderly program, JADEP, to provide basic level of healthcare support for the masses of Jamaicans, modernizing the financial regulatory system so that the sector could withstand shocks like the 2008 international financial crisis without a single insolvency, implementing the PATH program to provide basic income support for hundreds of thousands of economically marginalized people. These are only a few of the stellar achievements of that 18-year period. Portia Simpson Miller brought the Jamaican economy back from the brink of disaster at the end of 2011 and restored the country's public finances to a condition of sustainable health. Sister P was ably assisted by Dr. Peter Phillips as our finance minister, and the achievements of those 4 years include successful reforms to the country's system of revenue collection, which has created the fiscal space which serves as a platform for social investment in the future. Comrades, we are at the stage, an early stage, of the 5-year electoral cycle. And now is the time to take stock of where we have been, where we are, and where we are going. The recently transformed Policy and Vision Commission of the party will provide intellectual leadership within our party as we embark on a new era of ideological and philosophical self-discovery. This work is critical in a world that has shifted fundamentally and continues to change rapidly. Climate change and the need to build sustainability and resilience into all that we do, the geopolitical decline of the West amidst the rise of the East, the re-emergence of Africa, the continued dominance of digital technology in its many forms, all of these things present new challenges and opportunities for Jamaica. Our future electoral success cannot rely solely on the achievements of our past, the glorious years of PNP government. We must articulate an ambitious vision for the future that will attract Jamaican voters to our party, especially the younger generations who are more concerned about the type of country their government will create for them and their future. Looking at this from the orientation of our democratic socialist tradition and our identity as a progressive political movement, it is clear that the party must recommit to putting people's development and well-being at the center of our policies and programs. When we in the People's National Party speak of people power, it is because of our recognition that our people have been historically oppressed and marginalized in Jamaica, and it is a mission of our political movement to right those wrongs. The righting of those wrongs and the correction of historical imbalances in our society, which continue to retard national development, require people-centric policies designed to strengthen and uplift the capacities and prospects of all Jamaicans, especially the masses of the people. The results of the failure to make the required levels of investment in our people have come home to roost. I believe that the core solutions to most of Jamaica's problems lie with our people. The priority of the state at this juncture in our history must be to make the strategic investments in our people, in our human capital, to create a generation of productive citizens who can compete in what is now a global competitive marketplace. We must begin with a holistic approach to early childhood development, including critical aspects like parenting skills, nutrition, and core values of self-esteem and an empowering sense of personal identity in our little ones. Giving our children the right start in life is absolutely essential to achieving our national goals. Start them right and make them bright. Yeah. Primary education also needs significant attention. It is well documented that there is a massive divide in standards and outcomes in our secondary schools between a relatively few schools which are performing well and a majority of schools that are producing unacceptably low results. And when you consider why this is so, we see that the main problem lies in the low level of educational attainment achieved by the students entering the low-performing secondary schools. We have a situation where many of the children are completing their primary education without basic competence in reading, writing, and arithmetic. There are too many secondary schools receiving cohorts of students with failing averages in these elementary building blocks for further learning. This results in frustration, low self-esteem, delinquency, and completion of secondary school with no subjects and few prospects for the future for far too many of our students. This is, of course, fundamentally connected with the national crime crisis, as a stream of youths facing a life of low status end up embracing the allure of badness and the gun culture. To better ensure secondary school outcomes, we must level up the standards in our primary schools. This will mean investing in these schools, particularly those which are underperforming, and increasing the teacher training and improving it to raise standards. We must also ensure that our teachers have the relevant and modern skills for teaching in an increasingly digital age. We also need to invest in our youths who are not in school, not in a tertiary institution of learning or training, and not in a job. Jamaica cannot afford to leave these youths out in the wilderness. The society must provide them with the opportunity to become productive citizens who can build a future for themselves and their families outside of a life of crime or prison or death. The Peace Management Initiative, which is a community-based system for managing conflict, and Unite for Change, a program which provided opportunities for self-improvement for those who would otherwise face poverty and social exclusion, are examples of the right approach to this difficult problem. The PNP must design a comprehensive national program of social reorientation, upliftment, and opportunity for the youth of our country who are staring at the blank wall of hopelessness and face the temptations to pursue the wrong path in life. Comrades, repressive laws and hardcore law enforcement will fill our prisons and cemeteries, but it will not provide a sustainable solution to the chronic problem of violence in this country. The PNP must herald a new and more balanced approach that can change the destructive dynamics of our current social arrangements and allow the country to breathe again in a more loving and caring culture of peace and harmony. Comrades, there are, of course, many other areas where we must design progressive policies to unleash the tremendous talents and potential of our people in agriculture and agro-industries, creative industries, digital technologies, just to name a few. There will be opportunities to speak to some of these in greater detail in the future. But today, I have set out the basic orientation of my thinking and where I believe the party needs to take Jamaica when we next form government. We must have the courage and resourcefulness to tackle the sources of our nation's most fundamental challenges, and those lie with the people and the capacities of our people. There is no alternative, as the current approach is not working and cannot work because it fundamentally misses the mark. We must do these things with a fixity of purpose based on the moral courage that comes with knowing that our efforts and commitment are not for ourselves, but for the upliftment and empowerment of the people of our country. We commit to this as we continue the historic journey of our noble movement. So, comrades, let us join hearts and hands and move forward as a united party in the interests of the Jamaican people who we are here to serve. We are powerful together.